On a winter night in 39 AD, Rome froze. Not from cold, but because every family knew this was the night someone's daughter would disappear. Imagine being 14 years old, already in your nightclothes, when suddenly you hear armored footsteps echoing down your street. You grew up believing a call from the emperor was a privilege. No one warned you it could come without warning, that guards would cross your threshold as if your home already belonged to them, and absolutely no one warned you why they carried a lantern covered in red cloth that they would place in front of your door. In minutes, you'll hear your mother whisper your name as if saying it too loudly might anger the gods. Your father will force a smile he cannot hold. And you'll learn the truth every noble family fears. The Palatine doesn't summon daughters, it claims them. This isn't rumor. This was the night the Garden of Venus opened, a ritual so terrifying that Rome buried every trace of it. The girl who will learn the truth first is Flavia. Remember her, because everything you're about to learn forged the man who will soon decide her fate. To understand how a human being can rot from the inside and emerge as a creature capable of consuming an entire empire, you must go back to the beginning, back to the bloodline that birthed him and the shadows that shaped him long before Rome learned to fear his name. Caligula did not materialize from madness. He was born into glory, the son of Germanicus, Rome's golden general whose very presence could quiet a legion. The boy should have inherited honor and nobility. Instead, something far more corrosive seeped into him. His childhood unfolded not in gardens, but on the raw edge of the empire, in military camps drenched in sweat and iron. He learned to walk between rows of hardened legionaries. Soldiers adored their commander's son in miniature armor and called him Caligula, Little Boot. A nickname meant in love, but one that would soon cling to a far darker legacy. But even then, something inside him bent. That frontier life taught him its first rule: power isn't inherited, it's taken, and once you take it, you don't ask forgiveness for how you use it. It was the first crack in the child's soul, and the cracks were about to deepen. The shattering blow came with the mysterious death of Germanicus. Overnight, the beloved child became a target. He watched helpless as his mother and brothers were exiled, imprisoned, and executed one by one. Not by enemy armies, but by the cold will of Emperor Tiberius. Then came Capri, the island where Rome imagined Tiberius retired in peace, but where something monstrous festered behind palace doors. The twisted lessons Caligula learned here, Flavia will pay for them in ways she cannot yet imagine. Caligula, barely more than a boy, was forced to live beside the man who had annihilated his family. Capri was not a refuge, it was a gilded coffin sealed with paranoia. For 6 suffocating years, he survived under the gaze of an emperor who trusted no one and killed on a whim. There Caligula learned a new rule, one far darker than the first. To live, you must smile at the man you want to destroy. He hid every tear, swallowed every tremor of rage, and bowed to the murderer of his blood. While he remained outwardly obedient, the fractures in his mind widened until something cold and resentful slipped through. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD and the Senate lifted Caligula, now 24, onto the throne, Rome erupted in relief. A new dawn. A new prince. The son of Germanicus had come to cleanse the rot, and for a moment he did. He freed prisoners, destroyed records of Tiberius's spies, cut hated taxes, poured gold into the streets with games and feasts. Rome believed it had been saved. But salvation was only the mask. Near the end of that first year, an illness struck so violently that the emperor hovered between life and death. When he rose from that bed, something vital had not returned with him. The boy who learned to hide his hatred on Capri no longer needed to hide anything. Standing atop the Palatine Hill, staring down at a city that worshipped him, Caligula finally grasped a terrible truth. At the peak of absolute power, there are no gods left above you, only victims below. The cheers of the masses, the trembling silence of the Senate, these did not humble him. His sanity sloughed away like dead skin, and beneath it emerged the creature Capri had carved. Generosity twisted into mania, justice curdled into cruelty, and within the darkness of his thoughts, an idea began to harden. Women of noble blood were not citizens, not daughters, not humans. They were instruments. And the first instrument he will test is waiting on a night Flavia does not yet know will destroy her life. This shift didn't fall on Rome like a thunderstorm. It crept into the city like a sickness, slow and untraceable, a poison that seeped beneath marble floors and into patrician homes until it reached the people who believed themselves safest. Somewhere across Rome, Flavia's household heard the knock. No family dared answer, but no one was allowed to refuse. It began with a visit. The emperor's heralds did not carry swords that day. They carried scrolls sealed with imperial purple, a color that meant life or extinction. Inside those scrolls was the demand no parent dared refuse: send your daughter. Not just any daughter, the most beautiful, the most pure, the most politically advantageous. Families called it an honor. They knew it was a death sentence wearing perfume. To deny the emperor was treason. To obey him was to hand your child to the beast. The girls were taken to a secluded wing of the palace, a place Caligula named, with cruel irony, the Garden of Venus. Flavia stepped across this threshold, believing she still had control. She would lose that illusion before sunrise. At first glance it was paradise. Pink marble walls, silk-lined beds, exotic perfumes, and servants who moved like shadows anticipating every need. The daughters of Rome stepped inside, believing they had been chosen for sacred service. But slowly, agonizingly, they realized the truth. Paradise was only the decoration. The prison was everything beneath it. The garden did not break girls quickly. It broke them slowly enough for them to understand every step of their undoing. The jewels they were forced to wear weren't decorations. They were chains. Heavy gold, cold against their skin, branding each girl as state-owned property. The transparent silks were worse, garments designed not to clothe them but to expose them, to remind them that their bodies no longer belonged to themselves. Their names were the first thing Caligula erased. Real names were dangerous. Real names meant identity, so he replaced them with numbers, mockeries, and humiliating nicknames. But the true weapon of the system wasn't jewelry, silk, or even fear. It was waiting. A torture that spilled no blood and left no visible scars, yet hollowed them from the inside out. They never knew when the summons would come. It could be tonight. It could be weeks from now. Every moment in between was an execution by anticipation. The echo of Praetorian sandals in the hallway made their hearts rupture with terror. Breathing became a chore. Sleep became impossible. By the time Caligula ever touched them, the psychological damage was already complete. They were prey softened for the killing. When the summons finally arrived, it led them not to a private chamber, but to the emperor's nightly banquets. The young women were paraded before Rome's elite like exotic animals on display. Not guests, but living ornaments. Caligula walked among them with the arrogance of a butcher choosing cuts of meat. He commented loudly on their bodies, mocking, praising, ranking, stripping away the last shreds of dignity they clung to. But the real cruelty wasn't his voice. It was the silence of the men who should have protected them. Fathers, uncles, fiancés, all seated at tables of honor, forced to nod at the emperor's obscenities. Their smiles stretched so tight they looked carved on. Any flicker of discomfort could condemn them or the girl to immediate death. That silence was its own kind of execution. Take Flavia, daughter of a respected consul. When she crossed the threshold of the Garden of Venus for the first time, she believed she might serve in ceremonies or walk beside the emperor. For the first days, Caligula showered her with gifts, attentiveness, even counterfeit gentleness. It disarmed her, it softened her, it set the trap. And when it finally snapped, when the illusion shattered, Flavia understood the one rule that governed this palace. You cannot resist a man who believes he is a god. Caligula wielded cruelty with expertise. He alternated brutality with feigned affection, beating a girl one night and weeping in her lap the next as he offered jewels worth kingdoms. This emotional whiplash rewired the mind. Victims no longer saw him clearly. Hope and terror blended, comfort and violence fused. The one who broke them became the only one who could soothe them, a dependency engineered to make escape impossible. But Caligula wasn't finished. He destroyed solidarity next. He ranked the girls who pleased him most, who disappointed him, who would receive favor or punishment. He turned them against one another until they clawed for crumbs of safety, each seeing the others not as companions but as competition for survival. Unity died. And once unity died, the emperor owned everything. When he tired of one of them, he didn't free her. He sold her. Clandestine auctions inside the palace walls offered broken young women to senators and generals, the same men who governed Rome by day. Caligula forced them to participate, staining their hands with the same filth that coated his own. Shared guilt is the strongest leash, and now the empire's elite were chained to him by their silence. But the shame did not stop there. Families were ordered to be grateful. Some fathers were forced to host celebratory feasts after their daughters were defiled. They toasted their child's honor while swallowing their horror like poison. In the Palatine, gratitude became another word for despair. Through all this, surveillance tightened like a noose. No corner was safe. Guards, slaves, spies, eyes everywhere. Even one muffled cry could be reported as rebellion. By 40 and 41 AD, the palace atmosphere had become toxic enough to suffocate. The girls who once arrived with bright eyes and soft voices were now skeletal phantoms drifting through corridors. Many stopped speaking entirely. Some stopped responding. Their minds retreated inward, hiding in the last place Caligula couldn't reach. Doctors noted dissociation, souls detaching from bodies just to survive. But the truth the court tried hardest to hide was far darker. The suicides had begun. Some girls broke, others shattered. Flavia was caught somewhere in the middle, too frightened to die, too broken to live. Whispers spoke of 6 confirmed suicides, but everyone knew the real count was buried under marble floors and imperial silence. Death, once the thing they feared most, became the only horizon that offered relief. A final act of sovereign freedom in a world where they owned nothing else. Some slit their veins with shards of shattered vases. Some tore strips of silk from their dresses and fashioned nooses. Others climbed the balconies and stepped off, letting gravity deliver the mercy their emperor never would. For these girls, the cold arms of death were kinder than Caligula's touch. But the emperor was not satisfied. He devised a new cruelty, a torment so perverse it attacked the victims through the people they loved. He allowed parents to visit their daughters, not to rescue them, but to watch them suffer. The girls were painted, perfumed, dressed in silks to hide their bruises. They were forced to smile, forced to act, forced to lie, their horror concealed behind cosmetics and trembling lips. And the parents, under the unblinking eyes of centurions, had to pretend this was a celebration. If a mother's voice cracked, she was executed. If a daughter dared let the mask slip, her family paid the price. But then Caligula made the single mistake every tyrant eventually makes. He humiliated the men who carried the swords. He dragged senators to watch their wives be violated. He mocked commanders of the Praetorian Guard, stripping them of dignity before their own men. And among those soldiers was a man whose loyalty had once been unbreakable, Cassius Chaerea, a hardened veteran and faithful servant of Germanicus. Caligula's mockery of him was relentless. The hatred in Chaerea and the conspirators mutated into something no longer political. It became survival. On January 24th, 41 AD, the tension finally exploded. During the Palatine Games, Caligula left through a private underground corridor to take a bath. Chaerea and the conspirators blocked his path. There was no speech, no trial, no warning, only steel. The first strike, a blade to the neck, shattered his larynx. His cries choked in a flood of his own blood. More than 30 stab wounds tore into him. The self-proclaimed Jupiter of Rome fell to the ground, writhing, pleading, dying like the terrified mortal he truly was. But the nightmare was not over. Sealed inside the Garden of Venus, the young women heard the chaos, the screams, the metal clashing, the thunder of rushing feet. They huddled in corners, shaking, unable to understand whether this was salvation or another form of doom. Then silence. Not the heavy silence of oppression, but the empty silence of a world where the monster was suddenly gone. Yet none of them dared move. Because after years in that palace, they understood one thing with horrifying clarity. When something ends in Rome, something worse often begins, and they were right to fear. Caligula's death did not birth a golden dawn, it opened a void. His Germanic bodyguards, discovering their emperor dead, erupted in blind fury. The palace transformed into a slaughterhouse within minutes. For the young women, the Garden of Venus became a death trap. Some fled barefoot through corridors littered with bodies. Others, paralyzed by years of conditioning, barricaded themselves in their chambers, waiting to see whether the next hand on the door would kill them or free them. Hours later, when the blood haze cleared, an unlikely figure emerged. Claudius, Caligula's trembling uncle, dragged from behind a curtain and thrust onto the imperial throne. Claudius faced an impossible truth. If Rome learned what had happened inside the Garden of Venus, the system, the complicity, the empire itself might crack. So he made a decision darker than silence. For the survivors, Rome's solution was not justice, it was payment. The palace returned the young women to their families draped in gold, clothed in expensive fabrics, and carrying dowries large enough to silence an entire city. But every coin carried the same unspoken command. Forget. Forget what happened, forget who did it. No trials were held, no accomplices were punished. Rome simply folded the truth into the shadows and buried it under layers of official silence. The girls returned to their villas, but the people who came home were not the ones who left. They were shells, walking corpses, bodies that still breathed, but souls that had died on the Palatine Hill. In cruel Roman society, a noblewoman's worth lived and died with her chastity. Though these girls were victims, children crushed beneath a system they could not resist, the stain followed them like a curse. Family honor was ranked above truth, above compassion, above their lives. Most never married, most never lived. They were hidden in side rooms, kept away like shameful relics. Their trauma unfolded in agonizing patterns. A hand on their shoulder triggered panic. A sudden noise made them collapse in fear. Sleep brought nightmares so vivid they woke screaming. Physical captivity had ended, but the prison in their minds had no guards to kill, no emperor to overthrow, no key that could unlock them. For them, freedom was not a victory. It was a sentence, a lifelong exile inside their own bodies. This wasn't an isolated horror. It was a flaw in the empire's very architecture. Rome concentrated its legislative, judicial, military, and even divine power into the hands of a single man. No checks, no limits, no escape if the wrong man climbed the throne. Caligula proved how thin the line truly is between civilization and savagery, between order and chaos, between ruler and monster. And that line was drawn not on marble, but on the bodies of the nameless girls who perished in the Garden of Venus. Rome built wonders that survived millennia, arenas, aqueducts, law codes. But it failed at the simplest duty of any society, to protect its most vulnerable from the predators at the top. The story of these women is not just a historical tragedy, it is a warning that echoes across time. A nation may reach the summit of power, but if it sacrifices human dignity in the process, its legacy will be written not in glory, but in shame. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. Share with those who love history. Thank you for listening. See you next time.